Modal interchange is by far my favorite composition tool. By favorite, I mean overused. It allows for the introduction of complex harmony to music without the tedious harmonic calculations often required to introduce said complex harmony. The simplest way to apply modal interchange would be to borrow chords from a different scale. But before we can talk about how to use modal interchange, we obviously need to understand what modes are. Luckily, today I just happen to feel like talking about modes. So let us define modes in non-musical terms. Now that we're here, where do we start? Right. A mode is a type of scale, and we've already defined scales in non-musical terms, but just in case you were not here, we agreed that a scale is a selection of notes that sound good together. The modal scale, or the mode for short, is a scale that is closely linked to a relative major scale. What does that mean? It means that the relative major scale and a particular mode share exactly the same notes, with the slight difference being the keynote. And in case I've never defined keynotes in public, the keynote is the first note in a scale and the note that gives the scale its name. So, for example, if you're working with the D major scale, the first note in the scale is D. That becomes our keynote because that is the note that is giving the scale its name. Now, in order for this to make a bit more sense, we need to take a little pit stop and talk about how we build scales. When I did talk about scales, I mentioned that you don't just randomly pick notes to be part of your scales. So, how do you determine which notes can and can't be part of the scale? Well, those of you who are mathematically inclined will be familiar with the term formula. Probably the physicists and chemists as well. However, for the rest of us mere mortals, we are more comfortable with the term recipe, which is basically a list of ingredients and instructions on how to prepare a particular meal. Each and every type of scale has its own formula or recipe, which determines which notes become part of the scale and which notes cannot be part of that scale. So now that we know about the formula, how do we actually build a scale? That's actually a very brilliant question. You build a scale in exactly the same way that you cook a meal off of a recipe in 3 easy steps. Step 1, decide on what and how you're going to cook. Step 2, prepare/gather the ingredients that you're going to use. Step 3, cook and serve the meal based off of the instructions of the recipe. So let's look at the steps individually and dig a little deeper into them. Step 1, deciding on what and how you're going to cook. I'm going to cook rice and chicken. How am I going to cook it? I'm going to fry the rice. I'm going to roast the chicken. This also applies to our scale. You're going to decide on the keynote, and I've chosen the D for reasons. And I'm going to build both a major scale and a minor scale. So I'm going to build D major scale and the D minor scale. Now that we've got step 1 taken care of, it's time for step 2, preparing the ingredients. This is going to buy whatever it is, going to buy the rice, the chicken, the seasoning, whatever you need to prepare your meal. Same applies here. I'm going to write out all the notes that are going to feature in both the D major and D minor scale. I start with the keynote, which is D. I also end with the keynote. And then I've got some other guidelines to help you on screen right now. Now that you've prepared the ingredients, it's time to cook the meal using the instructions of the recipe. So that is how much of which ingredient I'm going to use, how much heat, how long I'm going to cook, etc. All these instructions, you use them to cook the meal. You apply the recipe to the meal. And for music, it's not as involved. All you're doing is just applying the specifications of the formula to the notes that you've already laid out. So if you apply the formula of the D major scale to these notes, you end up with this. And if you apply the formula of the D minor scale to these notes, you end up with these notes. And that is how you build a scale. But wait, what if you didn't apply the formula? What if you just left the notes, if you just prepared the ingredients and left them as they are? What would you end up with? For those who've been paying attention, you'll notice that all these notes that we have laid out here are exactly the same as the notes in the C major scale, except of course for the keynote, which is C in the C major scale. And then this contraption here is actually D. What that therefore means is that this contraption is some kind of a mode, the Dorian mode to be specific. And if you used each and every note in the C major scale as a keynote without making any alterations to the notes themselves, you end up with the following modes. Now that we know what's what and who's who, we can actually get into the meat and potatoes of this video and actually define modes in non-musical terms. As you may have picked up from my not so subtle hints, I will be using the Avengers characters, the MCU Avengers, as avatars for the modes that I'll be discussing. So I will pick the Avengers character or characters that share similar traits and qualities with the modes that I'll be discussing, so that you get a slightly more emotional attachment to the mode than if I was to just describe what the mode is about. So without wasting too much time, let's get into it, starting with Ionian mode. Here it is. Look at it. The keen-eyed among you would have noticed that it has exactly the same notes as the major scale. That's because it is the major scale, and I've already talked about the major scale, so I won't go into too much detail about it. I will, however, say that the Ionian mode is the second brightest mode that we'll be looking at today, which means good vibes all around. In non-musical terms, I will liken the Ionian mode to Vision and or Thor, but more so Thor because he's more cheery, more brighter than Vision. These two characters are very strong, they're very dependable. I mean, nothing says dependable like 1,000+ years that we've been using the major scale, and we're still counting since it's still very much applicable today. Bonus fact, both Thor and Vision are worthy of lifting Mjolnir, so make of that what you may. The Dorian mode. This is the third brightest mode, and in terms of feeling, it represents either losing or gaining hope, depending on the chords and notes that you emphasize within your music. Emotionally, it is used to represent melancholy and longing, and who else embodies the feelings of longing more than Mr. America's ass himself? Not Captain America, not that guy, the symbol of American freedom and patriotism, blah blah blah, but Steve Rogers, the guy who just wants to hang out with Bucky and dance with Peggy in the 30s. That right there is a summary of the Dorian mode. The Phrygian mode. Ooh, chilly. Anyway, this was quite tricky for me because on the one hand, this mode is quite dark. The second darkest mode, in fact. However, it sounds so exotic that it is frequently used in TV shows and series as shorthand for the Middle East and Middle Eastern culture. So oftentimes people only focus on that side of the scale and forget that this is quite a significantly dark scale. There is a character in the MCU who represents this dichotomy quite well, and I am of course talking about Bruce Banner. I mean, the guy tells funny jokes, he acts normal, even tried to get it on with Black Widow. But on the other hand, this guy put a gun in his mouth and actually pulled the trigger. I mean, if that's not understated darkness, I don't know what is. I mean, he literally walked around for years with a rage monster inside him. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the brightest of them all? Lydian, of course. In terms of emotion, Lydian is used to represent unbridled joy and glee. It is also used to represent magic and otherworldly phenomenon. So, for example, John Williams used the Lydian mode to write the theme that represented the Force in Star Wars. If you're an ancient alien like me, you probably know or you've heard this more than once. That is Lydian. Make of it what you may. In our non-musical terms, the Lydian is obviously Doctor Strange. I mean, he's the magic man in the MCU. But I feel like there's another character who may not be an Avenger yet, but is a better representation of what Lydian is all about. That would be Scott Lang's daughter. not the jaded teen from like Avengers or whatever, but the one from like Ant-Man 1, the little kid without front teeth, that one. Just look at her. Look at how she acts. That's the lead in right there. Oh yeah. This is the Batman of modes. Perfectly balanced as all things should be. It is the middle of the road, embodying both darkness and lightness in equal parts depending on how you use it. This mode is quite laid back, it is relaxed, and it is mischievous, but also it gets the job done when push comes to shove, like Loki. But who better represents this mode than the AC/DC playing bastard, Anthony Stark? Especially the Iron Man 1 Anthony Stark. He is insane. Aeolian. Here it is. Look at it. The keen-eyed among you would have noticed that, hey, wait a minute. Didn't we do this already? Anyway, it doesn't matter because it doesn't change the fact that Aeolian is pretty much the minor scale. I won't get into detail about the minor scale because I've already covered the minor scale, but I will say a few other interesting facts about the minor scale. It is the third darkest mode, so it's kind of dark, but just beyond the border. And there are three types of minor scale. The Aeolian, which is the natural minor scale, the harmonic minor scale, which is the most popular version of the minor scale that is used today, and the melodic minor, which is just anyway, in non-musical terms, the minor scale would be best represented by someone like Fury Nicholas J. He is serious, he's furious, he's not afraid to get his hands dirty, but more importantly, he gets the job done. He's dependable. Another character who also represents this kind of focus and one-mindedness would be, last but not least, well, if you're starting out, this is definitely least, is the Locrian mode. This is the darkest mode, ain't nothing to say more than that. I will say, however, that this is not a very commonly used mode. If you're starting out, you probably want to avoid using this mode because you're not going to get much joy of it. It's, in terms of applicability, it's like a black hole. It just sucks everything and doesn't give much back. It's used in very niche death metal genres, but yeah, like I said, it's not very popular. In non-musical terms, I can only think of one character who has this kind of black hole-ish quality, and that would be Dormammu. Otherwise, yeah, the less said about this mode, the better. With that out of the way, that covers our little sneak peek under the hood of modes. Next time I plan on looking at chords. It won't be very long, it will be quite short, unlike this one. But yeah, until we meet again, please take care of yourself.